Hello, students. This is Dr. John Galaska, and this message is for my students of Research Methods, PSC5031. And as you can see here, I have the rubric for the journal article critique, which is the main summation assignment for this course. To be able to do this well, you're going to have to understand a lot of the concepts that are presented in Research Methods, both in the lecture and in the textbook that we have. So I'm going to go through this rubric, and I hope that what I have to say will make it a little bit easier for you to get it done. First of all, the article that you choose has to be a true experiment. Don't underestimate the difficulty of finding a true experiment. I'll talk more about that in just a second. It also has to be relevant to your interests in the field of psychology. For instance, if you're interested in addictions, you might want to find a peer-reviewed article that's a true experiment that has to do with dependency or substance abuse disorders. You get the idea there. I want this to be a learning opportunity for you to garner some incidental knowledge in dissecting the research article that you choose. Now, in order for a peer-reviewed article to be based on a true experiment, it has to have several things. It has to have an independent variable. Strangely enough, the independent variable is the one that you manipulate. Excuse me. And it has to have a dependent variable. The dependent variable is where you measure the results of your intervention. There are several kinds of research designs within subjects, between subjects, and mixed methods, which I hope that you will understand more about at the conclusion of the course. Some of you may understand these things already, but regardless, the article that you choose has to be a true experiment. That means it will have an independent variable that is, excuse me, manipulated, a dependent variable in which you measure the results of the manipulation. The independent variable is often the intervention. If I were to make a hypothesis about this assignment, I hypothesize that students will understand more of the concepts presented in this course if they do an adequate job of going through this rubric when they compose their journal article critique. So my independent variable there would be the rubric, and the dependent variable would be some measure of the results. And the hypothesis that I just stated is very, it's general. It isn't a hypothesis that one is capable of working with. You need to operationalize both the independent variable and the dependent variable in order to be able to do a true experiment that can be duplicated by someone else. And the idea of peer-reviewed literature is it's put out there in the scientific community, and anyone can look at it and they can say, I'm not so sure these results are really in line with reality. Let's try to duplicate this experiment. So there has to be enough information in your hypothesis to enable someone to duplicate the experiment. And if you look down on this rubric, you'll see down here duplicability. So you are going to make a judgment based on having read the article and dissected whether enough information was actually presented to make it duplicable. Good scientific research is always duplicable. Now, the general hypothesis could be something I hypothesize that students who use this rubric in doing their journal article critique will achieve better understanding, more complete understanding, more comprehensive understanding of the concepts that are presented in this class. General, not nearly specific enough to be operationalized. Operationalizing it would be something like, the first one is easy, the independent variable. I hypothesize that utilization of a rubric for composing the journal article critique as presented in the syllabus or in Sakai, the rubric itself, that's very duplicable, will make a difference in, that's the independent variable being operationalized, will make a difference in the understanding of the concepts presented. Now I'm going to have to make something that is measurable. And I will have to say something like, as measured by, and this could be a post test that I create. It could be any other way of quantifying understanding of the concepts. So saying the as measured by and then describing what that will be gives you something tangible, concrete, operationalized, enabling someone else to duplicate it later. So your IV, your independent variable, and your dependent variable both have to be operationalized. Now, in this rubric, you see very first thing is on time. Get it on time, you get the full 8 points. APA format, not all that critical, but it is worth learning. I will point out APA errors to you, but I won't deduct any points for them. I do encourage you to learn it. Professionalism of the presentation, in other words, is it nice and clean? Is it laid out according to APA or in a very clear, understandable format? This is a big one, proofread errors. These are errors where a person omits a word or has a misspelling. It's very easy to omit a word as you are composing because your brain fills it in for you. But unfortunately, it's not there for your reader. So please pay attention to the tiny errors. This is a reflection of your attention to detail on the assignment. So if you present an assignment that has no proofread errors in it, you have good attention to detail. I am sure that you found out, as have I, that even in textbooks, you'll be reading and you go along, whoa, his subject doesn't agree with this predicate, or they've left out a word here, or some other error that should have been picked up by a proofreader. Okay, so pay close attention to what you are composing. Identify the hypothesis. Often there will be more than one hypothesis in an experiment. And state the null hypothesis. You'll be learning exactly what the null hypothesis is very early in the course. It is a key concept in research methods. It's kind of like almost talking in double negatives in a way. The research hypothesis might be something like utilizing the rubric will improve understanding of the concepts in the course. That's the research hypothesis stated in general terms. The null hypothesis is that presentation of or use of the journal of the rubric for the journal article technique, journal article critique will make no difference in performance. Now, why do you have to know what the null hypothesis is? It's basically saying that your intervention, whatever it was, doesn't work. You need to identify this and state it clearly, because that is what we utilize for statistical analysis. We don't work in statistical analysis with the general hypothesis. We work to either accept or reject the null. Now, what do you think researchers want to do? Accept or reject the null? Of course, they want to reject the null hypothesis. And there are statistical methods for accepting or rejecting the null hypothesis. You need to identify the independent variable, which is the manipulation in the experiment. Identify the dependent variables. Those are how you measure the results. The dependent variable in the general hypothesis that I stated just a few moments ago would be the understanding of the concepts that are presented in the course. It's funny the way those are worded. The independent one is the one that you manipulate. Okay, you'd think that would be something that you'd leave alone. The dependent variable is the one wherein you measure the results of your intervention. Your intervention is your independent variable. You'll need to describe the sample and how they obtained it. We'll be learning about how to put together samples in the book. There's many, many ways to do it. The absolute best way is a true random sample, and that will be described in the book. You need to identify the number of participants or subjects in the research. And just generally speaking, you need to know that 16 participants or subjects is the minimum number that is needed to assume normality of the data. So 16 is probably the minimum number. Between 30 and 100 is generally enough subjects for almost any kind of research. There is a law of diminishing returns in adding subjects beyond 100. Now, in the case of the research hypothesis that I mentioned, it isn't very critical. Nobody's going to die if they don't use the rubric. However, in research, for instance, with pharmaceuticals, you will need to have a large sample. The large sample is you get farther and farther away from 100, you get smaller and smaller returns in terms of accuracy in accepting or rejecting the null hypothesis, which is important if one of the consequences might be a mild case of death. Okay, so with pharmaceuticals, you're going to want really large numbers, but for most research, between 30 and 100 works fine. And we'll be talking about that in the course as well. Minimum number 16 to assume normality. If you have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, usually it's identified as a pilot project that is just trying out a concept to see if there maybe is a viable research project there. So remember those numbers. 16 to assume normality of data. Between 30 and 100 is a good number for most research activities. However, when the consequences of making a mistake, rejecting a true null, when the consequences of that might be simply a mild case of death, you want to have large numbers of subjects, even though there are diminishing returns. Vaccine trials, 10,000 subjects. Okay, pharmaceutical trials, thousands of subjects. Okay, so describe the sample, described how it was derived. We'll be talking about how to derive samples and identify the number of subjects or participants in the sample. Blinding, talk about whether it was used or not. A single blind is when the participants do not know the objective of the study. A double blind is when the participants and the researcher both do not know who is assigned to the intervention group or who is assigned to the control group or placebo group. Triple blind is when those two, the researcher and the subjects, are blind, and in addition, a third party who evaluates the results is also blind to the assignment of the individuals to intervention or placebo, intervention or control group. By the end of this course, you should understand intervention group, placebo group, and I'm sure that some of you do already right now. One thing about arriving, as most of you are adults coming to change a career, some of you younger younger people just having finished your bachelor's probably have very fresh in your mind some of these concepts, but we will go over them as if nobody understood them. So please don't be insulted if you find some of the stuff repetitive of things that you have learned in the past. I just want to be sure that you will be well equipped to critique research after this course. And it's an important thing for you to do. Science is changing all the time. And conclusions that once were thought of as written in stone become modified by new information. Okay, so that's blinding. Sometimes they don't use any blinding, reported. Gold standard studies, the gold standard study, are triple blind, randomly selected, randomly assigned to an intervention group or a control group studies, okay? And in general, keep in mind that this kind of study that we're talking about, a true experiment, is considered quantitative research. If you are doing a database search for something, say on anxiety, because that's something that you want to study particularly, just start with Google Scholar and plug in anxiety, and then put down randomized control and plug that in. And if there are the words randomized, controlled, trial, or study in the abstract of that study, it is very likely to be a true experiment. Okay, that's the little thing there that will help you to find them. In Google Scholar is a good place to start looking, and then you can go to the databases that are available through Antioch's library services. We have a marvelous service there that you know about, perhaps, We Deliver, wherein if you have the title and the authors and the journal and the date of a study, you can get it for free through We Deliver. It's a great service. I have used it myself for resources about some of my clients. And it's precious. It's a very, very good thing for you to have. Control group, contrast group, or groups identified, how are they formed? If you are having what's called a between subject study, you have an intervention group and you have a control group. How were those groups formed? Were they self-chosen, self-assigned? That could result in bias, okay, participant bias, or were they randomly assigned to one or the other? So identify your control group, your contrast group, or the groups, and how they were formed, if you can see them there. You may be hearing a little bit of noise in the background. It's a dishwasher in the kitchen that's behind me trying to do its thing. So I apologize for that noise. It sounds like somebody's hyperactive stomach a little bit. Okay, now one thing you have to do is compare the article that you have chosen to another source. And you make a brief mention of that added source. This can be 1 or 2 sentences, but it is something for you to keep in mind for the future. All the research that you read, you're going to want to find other research along the same topic. So you might find something on anxiety, that a good article that you're dissecting, critiquing. Find another article about it and mention it. The results in this peer-reviewed article are very similar to the results in such and such an article, or such and such an article refuted some of the findings in such and such. A sentence or two is all you need, but it is a caveat for you to remember in the future when you read research. Look for other explanations as well. Okay, brief mention of the added source, and you add a citation, of course. Describe the research design. This will be within subjects when you compare each subject to themselves. This would be the kind of thing where I pre-test my 25 subjects, say, for knowledge on research methods. Then I do my intervention. Let's just say my intervention is the rubric. Then I do my post-test, comparing the results of my post-test to the results of the pre-test that they took to see if the intervention made any difference. When you compare a subject to the same subject after an intervention, that's called within subjects, has advantages and disadvantages. The other is between subjects, have two groups. One group gets a rubric, one group doesn't get the rubric. You do a pre-test on everybody, you do your intervention only with the one group, then you do a post-test with both, and you compare the results of the ones who did not get the intervention to the results of the ones who did. That is called between subjects. Now, sometimes they use both methods in the same study. That is not uncommon. It's referred to as mixed methods. We'll be studying these things. Describe the utility or lack of it for personal use in the mental health field. All right, so you find an article on Oxycontin and opiates and the addiction. And this is something that you have an interest in, because remember, I want you to find an article that is relevant to your interests in the field of well-being. So you get some incidental knowledge added to the research method thing. It's kind of like spicing the vegetables or whatever. All right. So that's utility or lack of it. You could say that, just a sentence or two, I found the intervention described here to be something that I would personally use in my practice later on. Or you might come to the conclusion that it isn't worth it. Mention it, whether it is utilitarian or not. And that's what research is all about. It's developing utilitarian information so that you can use it in the field, okay? It's just not an exercise in academics. All right, now, in your article, throughout your composition, use research and statistical terms that we have learned and use them correctly, okay? One thing that you have to mention is the reliability and validity of the measurements or instruments used. These are psychometric qualities of instruments. And if you've had psych assessment, you've learned these things. If you haven't, we briefly cover reliability and validity in the text and in the lecture. You need to discuss generalizability. This is a really important concept. The idea of getting a sample of people and seeing what happens with that sample with regard to your intervention is not done just for an exercise for those people. It's done to find out something about a more general, larger group of people. We can't test everybody in the United States, but we could take a sample of people in the United States. We could devise a study, and that if our sample is chosen randomly and it's chosen with a sufficient number for the objectives that we have, then we can take these results and generalize them to a greater population. Sometimes results are not generalizable. For instance, many Psych 101 classes require their students to participate in research projects. We have tons of research projects based on Psych 101 students. Those projects don't generalize to the greater population. They only generalize to Psych 101 students, or perhaps a little broader to college students in general. But they certainly don't generalize to the broader population of the United States. So that is called external validity, when your results generalize to a larger population beyond the group that you have chosen. Now, internal validity, that has to do with whether you utilized or the researcher utilized proper procedures in doing their work and pulling off the research that they have done. If they've done a good job on all of that, you have internal validity. Here's an example of something that is poor internal validity. I have students, I'm going to test them on their research methods. I've got a couple of classes, but one is an evening class and one is a morning class. And so I give the morning class a test, see what their concepts are like before I do my intervention. I give the evening class one too, and then I jumble them all together. This is not good control of external or what are called confounding variables, because students in the evening often have food coma. They're tired. They've been working all day. Many of you have full-time jobs as well, so you can understand that. And that is that would be poor internal validity, lack of control of some confounding variables. You're going to learn about that stuff as we go along. Discuss both the positive and the negative points. See where it looks good. The researchers did a good job. See where it looks bad. Don't be afraid to mention it. Duplicability, I mentioned already. Now, I want you to go beyond what you've done in critiquing this and suggest some further research, possibly with alternative designs, methods, samples, or hypothesis to move the body of knowledge in our field a little bit beyond what these people have done. Okay, so this doesn't have to be long, can be a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs, doesn't have to be very long, but you suggest some ideas. For instance, hey, Dr. Glaska, next time you do that research on your rubric, make sure that the students all take the pretest at the same time of day, okay? All right. So suggest something to go beyond the research that you've read. Now, the rest of this part here, clarity of ideas, organization, thoughts, is all part of graduate level English. You are in the pursuit of academia here, and this requires clarity of thought, good critical thinking, and good organization, logical presentation. So that's where you'd earn these 9 points right down here. It's total points of 100. Okay, so if you have any questions about this, please do not hesitate to shoot me off an email. But go through this rubric, listen to this video again if you'd like, and this will help you with your final summation assignment, which is a big part. It's actually 1/2 of your total grade. So take care. I hope this was helpful, and do not hesitate to email me with questions. There are no bad questions. And my goal here is not to show you up or to embarrass you or to demonstrate where you don't have knowledge. My goal here is for you to come out of this with some knowledge that you didn't have before, or to refresh your memory of some concepts that you had already learned that would be utilitarian for you in the field of well-being. Okay, staying ahead of the wave, so to speak. All right, you guys take care, and I'll shut this puppy down here. If I can find the right button.